Thank you so much to all of you for being here. Thank you, Monica and Joni for having me. I'm so grateful to be spending this morning with you. And I'm really excited to share more about what I've been learning about creating safe and healing relationships as a therapist, but more importantly, just as a human uh, who cares so much about my connections and impact on other humans. So, in our time today, I want to start by helping us to identify our own needs for safety and connection. Um, and then also helping us to understand a little bit more about our relational templates and what factors really compromise our sense of safety in relationships. And finally, I'm going to offer you all 5 practices that I use in my work and that I think we can all use to create safe and healing relationships.
And Tiffany, before you get started, I just wanted to
Yes.
let the audience know that we will be sending out this presentation after the event to everyone who's registered. There will be some time at the end for questions, and you can also always feel free to put comments or questions in the chat during the course of our conversation today. Thanks.
Thank you, Monica. So, I want to tell you a little bit more about me. I'm so grateful for Monica's really warm introduction. I am a licensed Chicago based therapist where it is about 15 degrees this morning. So if you're in a warmer climate, I'm feeling a little envious, but also happy that, in quarantine, I can put on sweats after this and stay cozy at home. Um, so I'm really passionate about helping folks heal their relationships with themselves and others. And I currently work primarily with professional women, helping them to heal past trauma, build self compassion, and live more in alignment with their personal values. All of my professional interests are without a doubt informed by my own experiences in life. And as Monica mentioned, I spent almost 10 years before working in public relations and corporate communications. And I never really felt like I was at home in that space. I could never quite find my fit. And so, uh, 10 years in, I took a leap of faith and decided I wanted to scrap my original career plan and just kind of start over. And I really wanted to pursue a career that was more in alignment with my own personal values. And so I completed my master's degree in clinical mental health counseling at Northwestern University. And that journey of really leaning into my passions and interests led me here. And I've never been more sure that I'm exactly where I'm meant to be, doing exactly what I'm meant to be doing. So, before we go too much further, I want to give you a little insight into why I care so deeply about creating safe and healing relationships. So, I completed my clinical training in a residential treatment center for clients who were struggling with alcohol and drug addiction. And most of the clients I worked with in that setting, if not all of them, had really extensive complex trauma histories. And just so we're all on the same page, um, trauma is really any experience that overwhelms a person's ability to cope. And so sometimes that is, too much that happens too fast with too little resources. And other times it is too little that happens, and that should say too long. Too little that happens too long with too little resources. Both of those both of those experiences can be really traumatic and challenge our ability to create healthy connections with others. So complex trauma, which is what I was working with in the treatment center, is characterized by severe, repeated abuse, neglect, and harm. And it impacts, our ability to just show up in our relationships and trust that we're going to be taken care of and our needs are going to be met. So, as a new therapist working in this really intense treatment environment, I was so eager to do as much as I could to really help my clients create change and heal. And in those very early days and weeks, I often found myself feeling so frustrated that our short term treatment setting of just 30 days didn't allow the therapeutic process to unfold in the ideal way I'd imagined, which I later learned is it's kind of a fantasy. It's not real. Um, so week after week, I would bring my frustrations to my clinical supervisor, and I'd go on and on about how I wanted to do more and how the clients needed more and how there just wasn't enough time. And my supervisor at the time, who became so instrumental in really shaping my clinical lens, would always say, "You're probably doing so much more than you think you are." And we'd talk about how the therapeutic relationship that I was working so hard to build with my clients in that 30 days time was so important. How my efforts to be fully present, to listen deeply, to create safe spaces mattered, perhaps even more than any intervention I could use or anything I could do. So, one of the things that eventually gave me a sense of peace about the things I wouldn't be able to accomplish um, is that I was sowing seeds. That's how I started to kind of make sense of it for myself. I was sowing seeds every day when I showed up for my clients, every day when I worked to be fully present and to listen and to offer myself completely to be a support for them. I was sowing seeds of safety, seeds of hope, seeds of connection, seeds of care. And all of those things could cultivate healing, even if I wasn't always able to witness it firsthand by the time that 30-day treatment ended. And so that training experience really changed the way I thought about my role as a therapist and as a professional helper. And so instead of putting all of my focus on what interventions I could do, how I could create change, I started really focusing on how I could cultivate a healing and helpful relationship with my clients. One that was hopefully very different than the many other relationships they experienced before that caused so much long lasting harm. But before I could create any real sort of connection, I had to, in all of my interactions with my clients, create that sense of safety that would allow for a deeper connection so that we could really work together. So, over the course of my training, I began to wonder and explore what is safety in a relationship? How is it created and how is it experienced? And that experiential learning kind of created the foundation for how I do therapy with all of my clients now. And the more I do this work, day in and day out, the more I realize these skills I'm really working to learn and cultivate, they're not just for therapists and for helpers, they're for all of us. And so research shows us that for anybody that has experienced any relational trauma, right? And it doesn't have to be as extreme as what I was talking about with my clients, but any relational trauma or harm, um, it's not just the relationships between the therapist and the client that are really helpful and healing, but a variety of safe relationships can cultivate what's called a recovery or a healing environment. And so that's true for all of us. I really believe that we all have opportunities to help each other heal. So this message today is all about how can we move away from thinking just about individual care and treatment and healing to more collective care and healing for all of us. So before we go too much further, I want to take a few minutes and ask you or invite you to do a visualization exercise with me. And you may want to turn off your camera and just get as comfortable and cozy as you can where you are. And I want you to start by just taking a few deep breaths. I don't know what your morning has been like, but sometimes we move so fast that we don't take even a moment to check in with ourselves. So I want to encourage you to just breathe. You're welcome to close your eyes if you're comfortable. If that's not comfortable for you, you can just fix your gaze on some place in the room around you. Do whatever feels most comfortable. I want you to go ahead and plant your feet on the floor beneath you. Keep breathing and just start by noticing your breath. I want you to notice how you feel in this moment. I want you to notice what sensations are present in your body right now. And keep breathing. Now, I want you to think about where or with whom do you feel most safe? I want you to imagine that you're there now, in that place or with that person. It may be with someone you love. It may be a place in your home or out in nature. Just imagine yourself there now. What does it feel like to be there? As you keep breathing, I want you to again take note of any sensations that are now present in your body. What's present in your heart now? I want you to take a few last deep breaths. And when you're ready, come on back to the room. All right. I want us just to take another moment now to pause and reflect. And I want to invite you to share in the chat. What was that experience like for you? I know for some people, it may have been difficult to even find quiet in your mind and stillness in your body. That's okay. It's just something to notice and become curious about your experience. And I want to ask you, what does safety feel like for you? If your place of safety was with a person, what's special about that person? If it was a place, what's special about that place? Feel free to share in the chat, or you can also just make some notes for yourself.
Tiffany, some of the comments in the chat, authentic self. I keep hearing the washing machine making the repetitive sound.
Mm,
Love that. Uncomfortable physically, but extremely peaceful mentally and emotionally.
mm,
Secure, seen, valued, protected, honored. That's lovely, Sarah.
it's beautiful.
Warmth and closeness. Being with safe people is emotionally secure. Being near water feels calming and safe. Woodlands for me, absolute place of peace and rejuvenation. I love that word. Thank you for those of you who are sharing. It's really lovely to see. Really beautiful. Beautiful visualization, Tiffany. My safe place in my mother's arms. It's safe, warm, comfortable, and calming. Aw.
Mm,
Unconditional love as I fall asleep with my partner. Aw. Lovely. Really beautiful.
wonderful. Thank you so much to those of you who shared and to all of you for doing that with me. As you heard, there's a wide range of experiences that were represented, and probably even more that weren't. And so safety feels different for all of us, right? We all went somewhere different in our mind and in our heart. But what's true for all of us is that we all have needs for safety and connection. So our brains are constantly detecting through our environment and through our social interactions whether we're safe, whether we're in danger, or whether we're in life threatening situations. And we all have what Stephen Porges has dubbed the social engagement system, which is operated by our ventral vagal nerve. Um, and so when our brains detect safety cues, our social engagement system is activated, and that allows us to connect with others with ease. But on the opposite end, when our brains detect danger or threat, we go into that fight, flight, or freeze mode where it's really difficult to have positive, healthy interactions with others. So without safety, there really is no social engagement. So when we perceive we're unsafe, as you can see on the right side there, and that, when our dorsal vagal nerve is activated, we disengage, we disconnect, we may feel tension in our bodies, we become defensive, we may lose our mobility, and we may be really, really fearful. And when we pick up on safety cues, we're able to really connect, to collaborate, to be creative and open. We're able to express empathy for other people, and we're able to be pretty confident in our interactions. So, obviously, uh, it's ideal for us to be in those safe zones where our ventral vagal nerve is activated and we're able to engage with others with ease. So, what are some of those physiological safety cues? So, in our relationships, when we're one on one or even in a group, those are all the things that really happen like torso up, right? So, that's our tone of voice, that's our facial expressions, that's our posture, that's gentle touch, always with consent, of course. Um, and we're also able to offer ourselves safety cues internally, right? So that is through things like positive self talk, positive thoughts, pleasant memories. And then environmentally, some of you mentioned this as you were talking about your safe place, but it may be that sound of the washing machine humming over and over, right? That's a sense of comfort and safety because it's so familiar and so much a part of your daily routine. It may be a familiar song. It may be a scent, right? The smell of the ocean or the smell of fresh baked cookies. It may be with pets or animals. And there may be just certain spaces where you've really worked to cultivate a comfortable, safe environment for yourself, right? Like laying in your bed under cozy blankets or in a little nook in your home. Um, that's what's happening on a physiological level. And those are unconscious processes, and we're detecting those safety cues within milliseconds, right? So it's not something we're thinking about, it's something that's just happening. But it's also important to check in with ourselves and notice what's happening in your body as you're interacting with a new person, right? Or as you're walking into a new group, because your body has lots of wisdom about your experience if we listen. And safety is also an emotional experience. And so when we're in a safe relationship, many of our relational needs are met. And so this is not an exhaustive list here, but Many of these are relational needs, and there may be others that you can think of, but these are things like acknowledgement, appreciation, trust, companionship, validation, acceptance, encouragement, inclusion. So ideally, we get many of these needs met consistently in our earliest relationships with our caregivers. And when that happens without a whole lot of interference, it sets us up to have a healthy relational template or a secure attachment style. And so, what that means is we're able to foster connections with ease and embrace interdependence, meaning we're okay being on our own, and we're also able to be really comfortable with intimacy. We're able to be really flexible and open to differences between ourselves and others. We're able to manage conflict without too much drama or without becoming too overwhelmed. And we're also able to internalize the love that we feel from others.
Tiffany, I was just going to ask you, so
Yeah.
I think those words that you had on the slide before are so powerful, and it feels like sometimes we just kind of don't necessarily think about them out loud or take them
Mm-hmm.
for granted. Um,
Mm-hmm.
how do you encourage people to think about those words and what's showing up for them, and to really embrace the importance of these positive interactions of relational safety?
Yeah, of course. So, one of the ways that I think it's important to think about these is as you read these words and think about these needs in your own life, you might consider which needs are most important for you right now. Which needs are currently being met in your relationships? Which needs are um, needs that you are able to easily offer to others, right? And I think if we think about these relational templates that I'm talking about, it may be the case that the needs that feel most important for you now are needs that maybe weren't met earlier on, right? Or needs that are not being currently met, right? So I think this is a good way to kind of check in with ourselves, check in with our relationships, and first acknowledge these are things we all need, right? So there is no neediness, right? And acknowledging we need affirmation, we need acknowledgement, we need acceptance. Those are all human relational needs. And in healthy relationships, we're able to meet each other's needs, right? Sometimes things get in the way though. Um, and so it's okay if you find yourself pulled towards certain needs versus others, because those needs, when they don't get met in our early relationships, they don't go away. I always tell my clients that just like feelings, they're not they don't go away just because we get older or we grow out of something. They come with us. They're time travelers. And I think these needs are the same. They have to get met somehow. So I would think about what's most important for you now, what needs are getting met in your relationship, and what needs do you find it really easy to meet for others. All right. So, as I was saying, we don't all have the experience where our relational needs are met consistently by our caregivers. And so that can leave lots of gaps in our relational template, and that alters the way that we show up in our relationships. And so instead of being really secure, which is ideal, we may instead struggle with embracing intimacy, and we may be avoidant instead. Or we may have lots and lots of anxiety about having our relational needs met because maybe that's never happened before. And we may struggle then with feeling unworthy of love and care. We may always be expecting disappointment or to be abandoned. Or we may just be completely checked out because we've never had someone consistently show up for ourselves, right? So, checking out is our way of protecting ourselves. And so, we may be really self absorbed or really controlling when we are in relationships. And this is kind of the most basic overview I can offer you of our inherent attachment system and how our early experiences kind of shape the ways that we show up in our adult relationships. One thing I really want to stress is there is no shame in whatever ways we have adapted. That's what we do, right? When our needs aren't met in our early relationships, we adapt, right? And the ways that we adapt shaped how we show up. And so we all do the very best we can with what we have. And sometimes that's far too little support and resources. But the beauty in all of this, and the reason I'm so passionate about it, is that we are all designed to heal. And through repeated experiences and healthier relationships and therapy and with our loved ones, we're able to kind of update our relational templates. So we can all move towards more secure, healthy ways of relating. And that allows us to connect with others in ways that really produce that mutual growth and healing. I want to just pause there for a second. I know I threw a lot at you with relational templates and relational needs. Are there any questions that are coming up? Any thoughts coming up?
Tiffany, we're hearing some comments in the chat. Wise words. That makes perfect sense. I really like
Mhm,
what you said about there's no shame in how we've adapted. One of the
mhm,
things I have to remind myself is, after a lot of work on myself, sometimes I go back and think, oh my gosh, what was I thinking? When I look back at myself 10 years ago or whatever that time period might be. And then I do have to remind myself, well, that former self didn't have all the knowledge and skills and abilities I have today. So I just
mhm.
have to be gentle with that soul, right?
Absolutely. I think that's so beautiful, Monica. And that's actually something I encourage all of us to do because it's so easy to look back in shame, right? And say, like, oh, I didn't get this right. Hold on to those little things that we did, or even the big things that we did or didn't do. But one, your past self still got you here, right? So I want to encourage us all to still hold lots of compassion for the past self that did the best we could, right? And somehow we survived. Somehow we're still on our own healing journey. Somehow we're still interested in doing this work and helping ourselves heal and helping each other heal. So there really is no shame in this because we can only do better if we know better, right? And that's why we're here. We're learning, we're getting to know better. But I think it's so important to still hold lots of compassion for the past versions of yourself that did it without what you needed, right? And the great thing is they still got you here. So they deserve some thanks and some
There's a few
compassion.
comments, Tiffany, that I just want to, and I think a question. This is helping me to look at others through their lens, knowing some of their experiences. Thank you. This is amazing. That's lovely. Be easy on ourselves. And then someone asked, can
Mhm.
you repeat the attachment from our earliest year is called?
Yes. So those are our attachment styles. So the ideal attachment style that I noted is a secure attachment. So I didn't want to get too in the weeds. We could do a whole other workshop on attachment, really, but there's secure attachment style, there's anxious, there's avoidant, and there's disorganized. So I kind of describe those in the ways that we relate. So when we're secure, it's really easy for us to relate to others. We don't have a lot of anxiety about that. We're pretty flexible. We're okay with interdependence, right? But if there are lots of gaps, if there's trauma, if our caregivers didn't show up, we may be anxious, right? We may worry about people leaving us. We may worry that maybe nobody cares about me. Maybe I'm not going to get my needs met. We may be avoidant, right? Because we learn that people are not going to show up when I have needs. So I'm just going to pull out, right? And sometimes when people have lots and lots of trauma, it can be a mix, that can create a really chaotic kind of experience with a person. And the other thing I'll note about that before we move on is we have different attachment styles and different relationships, right? So In relationships where you feel really safe, it may be easy for you to move toward that healthy relational template that's more secure, right? Whereas if you're feeling less safe, you may be more avoidant, right? You may be more anxious. And that's based on the nature of the relationship you're in at the time.
Thank
I
you.
hope that, yeah, made sense. Okay. So now, what can we do to enhance our sense of safety in our relationships? I want to offer you 5 ways that I'm practicing with my clients every day and even in my own relationships that I believe help create that sense of safety over time in an environment that enables us, excuse me, to have healing interactions. So number 1, and we kind of touched on this just a moment ago, but it's so important to create a healing and safe relationship with yourself. While I know that so much of what we're talking about is collective healing, that really doesn't take our individual work out of the equation. So I think it's so important that we each make a commitment to ourselves to cultivate that same kind of safety that we want to offer and experience with others. So, what does that look like? I think on the most basic level, it is creating space to check in with yourself on a regular basis. I think, as I mentioned really early on in our talk, so often we move so fast through our days, through our weeks, and our months, even that we're so focused on our to dos, our work, our families, our significant others. And we don't stop to notice, how am I feeling? What do I need? What's present for me now? What's working well in my life? What's not working anymore? And I know those may feel like really overwhelming questions if you haven't asked yourself that in a while or ever, but start small. You may begin just by taking a minute or two every day or a couple times a day to notice what's present for you now. Start by listening to your body. If you check in with yourself and you find that your stomach is growling, can you just pause and grab a snack? Drink some water? If you check in with yourself and you notice, oh, my shoulders are so tight, right? My shoulders are at my ears. Can you take a second just to let your shoulders fall and relax and maybe stretch for a minute or two? And then another way, that's a really great way to practice checking in with yourself and paying attention to yourself is pay attention to the way that you're talking to yourself about yourself. So often we align with our inner critic, but instead of aligning with our inner critic, can you just begin to question it? Are your thoughts about yourself accurate and true? Where did those thoughts come from? When you find yourself being overly critical or judgmental or harsh with yourself, take a moment to replace those critiques with positive affirmations. And you can literally start by doing that one thought, one affirmation at a time. And I think one thing I'll note, because this comes up often, is, sometimes it feels like, I don't really know how to be gentle with myself. I don't know how to be less harsh. But I want you to think about, as Monica brought up, I want you to think about, can you envision a past version of yourself? Maybe a much younger version, maybe a 5-year-old version or a 10-year-old version. How would you want that person to be spoken to? What would have been helpful for them? How would you want them to be treated? If you can't do it for yourself now, try and go back a little ways. It's also important to practice regular grounding and soothing to kind of restore a personal sense of calm. And the final note on this is seek support when you need it. As I mentioned, I'm really passionate about helping people heal their relationships with themselves because this is one of the biggest barriers to our connections with others. So there's no shame in seeking some support or guidance in this way. And in fact, it's a very healing and compassionate act towards yourself. That's number one. Number two is be aware of your power and your privilege. So, all forms of oppression are also relational oppression. That's a quote by Jean Baker Miller, who is a creator of relational cultural theory, which is, if you haven't heard in my speech, informed a lot of the way that I practice. And so, in any relationships where one person has more power, the danger of harm increases. So, safe, growth producing relationships are born of mutuality. And that doesn't mean that the relationships are always equal, but what it means is that each party is participating in the relationship as fully as possible, and they understand the impact they have on one another. And the problem so often is that people with power in the relationship are unaware of their effect on others and the way the power differential impacts the relationship. So it's really important to build some awareness around where there are power imbalances in our relationships. So our power and our privilege is really wrapped up in our social locations and our intersectionalities. So, for example, anyone belonging to the dominant culture, which has the most power, right? In America, that is white, that's cisgender, that's male, that's Christian, that's middle class, that's English speaking, that's able-bodied, that's, on and on. We could come up with some list together. But for anyone with a marginalized identity, so anyone who is not those things, with a in a relationship with a person of the dominant culture, there's an increase in the potential for relational harm. And remember, when those things happen, we carry that trauma with us. It shows up not only in our physiology, but also in our relational template. So you have to consider it's not just that maybe you haven't as an individual caused harm, right? Like maybe you haven't done anything that's harmful. But what does your identity and your social location represent for a person of a marginalized identity? Does your identity and your social location represent an oppressive, harmful system like patriarchy or white supremacy? Right? And once you understand that power you have and that privilege you have, it's important to think about what can you do about that? How does that inform the way you relate with other people? Brene Brown has kind of popularized the idea of power over versus power with. And so wielding power over others can be obviously so harmful. And that is things like bullying or being really directive or really controlling and shaming. But I really also want to note that it doesn't always have to look so extreme. Sometimes it's those really subtle microaggressions that have such a huge cumulative impact. And so we can think about the impact of those microaggressions as death by 1,000 cuts. So it's not that singular jab, right, that everybody's going to notice and see, but it's those little cuts over and over and over and over again that are so harmful and damaging long term to our relational templates, to our sense of safety. And so, on the other hand, though, power can be used in ways that are incredibly healing and helpful. And we don't need the folks with power to just surrender it and say, okay, I don't want to be a person with power. We actually need people with power to use it responsibly to empower others and to be allies. That's number two. Know your power, know your privilege, and then figure out what can you do about it. Number three, practice humility and prepare to repair. So this is so important. We have to know that we don't know it all. We don't know it all. And it's even better to not just know that we don't know it all, but to know what we don't know. You need to have some awareness around what you don't know. And it can be so healing and helpful to acknowledge that, to bring that awareness into our relationships. We all have blind spots and biases. And the other really important piece of this is we can't always rely on others to fill in the gaps of our knowledge and understanding. We have to be willing to do the work to learn and grow so that we reduce the risk of harm caused by all the things we don't know. And the last point here is we're not going to get it all right all the time. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. So go ahead and make peace with that. But what's really important here is, are we able to be open to feedback about how other people are experiencing us, about our impact on other people, and then practicing to repair the ruptures that are inevitable in our relationships. And on the flip side of that, if you've been wronged, practice meeting other people's attempts at repair with open-heartedness. So when you're thinking about how to be humble and how to repair ruptures, some questions you might ask as a check-in, right? Is a person I'm in relationship with able, is there space for them to offer feedback about their experience? Are they able to tell me when I've made a mistake, right? Is there openness to hear that maybe something I intended well wasn't received that way? Is there space for that in our relationships? If not, we've really got to try and open that up, right? Because we may be doing harm without even knowing it. We've got to open that space and then be able to take accountability for actions that are harmful.
Tiffany, can I just add a personal note there as a parent?
Please. Yes.
So I'm a parent to two boys, and one is 24, so a young man. And recently we were in a conversation, and he gave me some feedback about how I was showing up, and I didn't really agree with the feedback. And my first reaction was kind of this defensiveness, but luckily I stayed quiet. And, I really, wrestled with that defensiveness. And I think especially as a parent, we can easily get defensive thinking like, oh my gosh, all I've done for this child, or they don't understand what I've gone through to get to this point, or how much I've grown, or, whatever that is, right? You kind of do that self-talk, excuse making for, that. And I think I just really at that moment just said, this is his experience, not mine. And I have an opportunity to change the stance and to just be present and to listen and to hear him. And then afterwards, I sent him a card with some thoughts supporting that he was open with me. And that felt like such a better dance as a parent than the defensiveness or argumentative. And I'm not saying I do it perfect all the time, but I just wanted to, openly share that experience and say, yeah, what you're saying here is so relevant. And it's also really hard. It's hard.
Yes.
And so I like what you
Yes.
said about we're not going to be perfect every time.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that, Monica. That's a beautiful example. It is a dance, you use that word, it is a dance. And the other thing to really remember, and you demonstrated this, Monica, in your example, is that we may disagree, right? We may really believe I didn't cause harm, right? Or I didn't intend this to come off this way. And the thing to remember is we are not the expert on anybody else's experience, right? So despite our intentions, if somebody says, hey, this was hurtful, hey, I don't like the way you said that, we have to own that, right? And we have to make space for that in our relationships and not take it always as an attack. Now, I will say one of the things that gets in the way is that relational template, right? That's why I brought that up early on, is sometimes when we respond with defensiveness, it's because we've never had those experiences of repair before. So this feels foreign, right? If you grew up in a home where you weren't able to give feedback, you weren't able to say, this hurt me, you never heard an apology, this is like a lot. And so it's going to take time to lean into this and to recognize that it's not always an attack, right? It's not always a reflection of your character. It's that something you did or said hurt someone else. And we have to own that and figure out, how do we keep going? Um, and we don't have to get it right all the time, you know? If we're able to repair, it really goes a long, long way. All right. Number four. Number four is practice presence. This is probably my favorite, um, because it's so powerful and so impactful. But presence is not one thing we do, it's really a way of being with another person. It's about decentering ourselves and being really mindful of the other person and their experience. And so we can practice presence by showing up with intention, by kind of freeing ourselves of distraction so that we can really communicate with our whole being, right? With our body, with our face, with the openness of our mind, that we are with the other person and we are for the other person. It's such a powerful healing practice. I want you to just think for a moment, when is the last time you had someone's undivided attention, where you were just face to face, no distractions, right? You're locked in, you have eye contact, you can feel a sense of closeness, you can feel that care. When's the last time that happened for you? When's the last time you were able to offer that to someone? It's so healing and so helpful when it happens. Um, Richard Erskine described this so beautifully in saying, presence is more than just communication. Presence provides a sense of interpersonal communion. And so a part of presence is really honoring the other person just as they are, kind of seeing them as a sacred person who deserves that undivided attention and that fullness and presence of mind and that care. This is another hard one, but it's really, really important and really, really impactful when it's practiced over time. All right, number five, our final practice is maintaining and communicating healthy boundaries. So, in order for our connections to be safe and to remain safe, boundaries have to be clear, they have to be reliable, and they have to be trustworthy. And they really are. Boundaries are an act of care both for ourselves and for others. They maintain the health and the integrity of our relationships. And, I wanted to really acknowledge that sometimes we don't have the privilege to remove ourselves from relationships that don't feel safe or that are not safe. And boundaries are a way that we can kind of reduce the risk of harm in those relationships. When we can't leave situations that don't activate our, social engagement system, can we try to firm up our boundaries as an act of self-care and self-compassion? And you may need some support with that, right? That may feel like, how in the world would I do that? That may be something you need to seek some support with. How can I create boundaries when I'm not able to leave this job, right? I'm not able to get away from something that's traumatizing on an ongoing basis. Maybe, you're not able to walk away from interactions that just, feel like they chip away at you little by little over time. And so in those cases, how can we really firm up our boundaries a little bit to offer ourselves a little bit more protection and care? I also want to say, in practicing all of this, I'm not suggesting that we become martyrs for this cause, right? It's not, we're going to create safe relationships for other people at all costs. That's not it. We still have to be very aware of our own sense of safety at all times. And sometimes this doesn't work perfectly. There may be times when we bump into other people's stuff, right? When our relational templates just really are not working well together, right? And sometimes we have to walk away from those relationships when we're able to, when it's possible, right? Um, it doesn't always work perfectly. It just doesn't happen, right? There may be times when we have to create some distance so we can heal in different spaces, seek support in different spaces. Um, and so this is not, again, I'm not encouraging you to kind of extend yourself at any and all cost. And especially when we have power or privilege, we really have to think about how can we maintain our boundaries so that um, we're not causing undue and even unintentional harm or distress. All right, that's number 5. Boundaries, boundaries, boundaries. One last thought I have about this before I flip to the next slide is that when we've never practiced setting boundaries before, there's lots of anxiety around that, right? We think we're being hurtful. We think that we are causing other people pain. And one of the things about creating that safe and healing relationship with ourselves is kind of building some tolerance for the discomfort of other people not always being happy with us or not always being pleased with our decisions. So people will get mad. People won't always like it, especially if this is a new thing and you're disrupting some patterns. And that's okay. You're still okay and it's still necessary.
Tiffany, there's a couple comments in the chat that I want to share that I think are great.
Please.
Somebody
Yeah.
wrote, the most valuable part of my self-love journey has been learning boundaries, and that is healthy, and you're not wrong to look after yourself by sometimes having to say no or walk away.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Tolerance for discomfort. I'm going to use that. Presence is so important. For some reason, it made me think of people who like to be on their cell phones during lunch or when watching a movie. The disconnection is real, and you don't feel like
Mm-hmm.
you're bonding with that person anymore. And
Mm-hmm.
they might not feel like they're doing something wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody else commented about it's hard during the pandemic situation.
It is hard. It's very hard. Um, it's very hard. And I think there are also lots of opportunities for us to notice where we're struggling with all of this, right? What's hard exactly? It's hard to not be distracted. It's hard because we're on our screens. It's hard because we don't have enough space to take care of ourselves, right? And I think one of my biggest encouragements is in all of this is it is hard. It really is hard. And it doesn't always have to change or flip overnight, right? Like, what little things can we do, right? Can we commit to practicing presence with our kids or with our partner for 5 minutes, right? At the dinner table, where you say, we're not going to pick up phones for 5 minutes, right? Or can we practice communicating some boundaries in a relationship where there has been none? It's those little shifts that really create healing and change.
And Tiffany, you have so much beautiful wisdom. We're at the end of our time. Do you have a final parting thought that you'd like to share?
I do, yes. And I was just kind of saying it, but patience, practice, consistency, right? These are little things that make a big difference when we practice over time. So you may not see shifts that happen overnight, but you're sowing seeds, seeds of hope, seeds of connection, seeds of care. All of those things over time create so much beautiful healing and growth for all of us. So thank you so much for allowing me to share. I know that you'll get this PowerPoint after our time to get today, but there are some books that I want to recommend. And also, I would love to connect beyond today. So I've shared my email. I'd love to have you join my community on Instagram and also on LinkedIn.